Social stratification is at the core of sociological analysis and research, and so it is important for anyone taking a sociology course to develop a firm understanding of it. In this video, I am going to introduce you to the concept of social stratification by providing you with a definition and then deconstructing it with supporting examples. This will be followed by an in-depth discussion on the key features of social stratification. By the end of this video, my goal is to provide you with a firm understanding of what social stratification is and explain why it is essential to sociological analysis and research. Let's start with a definition. A good conceptual definition of stratification is as follows. Social stratification is the emergent and/or purposeful ranking of people and groups into categories that are used to establish or reinforce relative social worth. Since this definition contains two key concepts, I want to take a moment to discuss each one using concrete examples. The first concept states that social stratification is the emergent and/or purposeful ranking of people and groups into categories. This is the most basic aspect of social stratification. However, the underlying assertion contained in this first concept implies that social stratification can emerge from either intended or unintended social actions. So I want to take a moment to offer you two examples that illustrate the intended and unintended emergence of a social category. If we think about the category rock star, we find that it emerged through a series of unplanned and seemingly unconnected social actions. Perhaps the first true rock stars were either Buddy Holly or Elvis. However, Buddy Holly and Elvis did not set out to develop this social category. It emerged over time. It was unplanned because it was largely out of their control. This is because in order for the category of rock star to emerge, a society had to have rock and roll music, it had to have the necessary recording technologies, and it had to have an economic system that allowed musicians to produce and distribute their music to millions of people. In other words, they had to have the infrastructure in order to create and sustain a fan base. Of course, in today's world of entertainment, the category rock star has been solidified, and we now have pop stars and rap stars as well. In any event, all of us know what a rock star is and how to value and rank him or her in relation to those who are not rock stars. And so the category rock star is now part of our stratification system with its own rank. Yet the emergence of the category and its rank was largely unplanned. It is what sociologists call an emergent property. In addition to the emergence of unplanned categories and ranks, there are instances where categories are purposefully created with the intent of establishing a specific social rank for a group of people. That is, there are categories that exist as the direct result of intentional or planned social action. A good example of this are the dichotomous racial categories of white and black. Originally, the dichotomous categorization of people based on skin color was used by Europeans to justify the enslavement of African people. By linking skin color to social worth, European colonial powers were able to lower the status of African people to the point that they were perceived to be animalistic. In other words, the category black was deliberately used to strip the humanity away from Africans in order to justify enslavement and inhumane treatment. So the main point that we can take away from the first concept is that social stratification can emerge through either planned or unplanned social action, but it always emerges as the result of social action. Now let's move on to the second concept contained in the stratification definition that I provided. The second concept asserts that social stratification involves the use of ranks and categories as a means to establish or reinforce relative social worth. The same examples that I provided earlier can be used to illustrate this point. In the case of rock star, the category was developed as part of popular American culture in order to establish a rank for musicians who are more than just famous, but revered well above other musicians. In the case of white versus black, the original dichotomous racial categories have and continue to reinforce conceptions of social worth based off of skin color. The fact is, the interests and concerns of white culture remain far more valued in American society than those of racial minorities, despite the progress that has been made. This bias is visible in American entertainment, particularly television. If we look at the top-rated primetime TV shows in the last few years, we find that each one centers on white characters, white culture, white lore, and the general white experience. Similarly, the popular reality TV show The Bachelor, which seeks to idealize romance, clearly reflects the bias toward white culture, which is ranked above racial minorities. The fact is, every featured bachelor has been white except for one, and the one who is not white can easily pass as white. ABC knows that in order for the show to be successful, it must appeal to the romantic ideals of white culture. It must present an image of an ideal mate that appeals to the predominantly white female audience. This means falling in love with a white guy, or to be more precise, a handsome, well-educated, rich, and physically fit white guy. In any event, the racial categories developed in colonial times have been used throughout American history to rank whites above non-white racial groups, even if it is now more implicit than it once was. Racial categories show us how stratification systems can be used to reinforce social worth, since they can become part of the fabric of society. This is the kind of insight that sociologists gain when assessing social stratification. Now that we have discussed and deconstructed the definition of social stratification, I want to examine three key features of social stratification that make it a central component of any and all sociological research and analysis. The first feature is that every society, regardless of its size, complexity, or culture, generates ranks and categories used for stratification. That is, social stratification is a universal feature of human societies. In simple societies, there are some members who are categorized and ranked higher and valued more than others. In this picture, we see the tribal leader who is dressed differently in order to distinguish himself from others of lower rank. Of course, the same is true for complex societies. England has a history of monarchs who are placed well above everyone else. President Obama holds a special kind of prestige that goes along with being president, even though he remains a citizen. The second key feature is that the value and worth of a given rank or category can change over time. For instance, take the shift in the relative social worth of England's royal family. Early on in England's history, kings played a direct role in shaping the kingdom's economic, political, and social policies. In many cases, kings rose to power because they led armies into battles and physically won the crown. This is far from the case for English royalty today. In modern times, England still has a royal family that is used to cling to its tradition, but the prestige and the rank of the royal family within English society has changed. The royal family is still wealthy, and they still have a high degree of social prestige, but their members are simply figureheads in politics with virtually no power. England is a democracy, not a monarchy. Thus, the royal family plays no role in determining real national policy. So the important thing to keep in mind is that categories and rankings within stratification systems are subject to change even when they are the most powerful categories within that system. The third and final key feature is that ranks and categories are directly and indirectly related to social inequalities. Although social inequality is a major topic within sociology, I want to provide you with a final example that will illustrate this link. I want to discuss a specific kind of social stratification known as gender stratification. If we think about the categories of male and female in our society, it is clear that there are attributes that all of us associate with male that we do not associate with female, and vice versa. While this may be obvious since we learn this as children, what might not be so obvious is that the attributes that we associate with each category plays a direct role in determining the rank of males and females within society, particularly within the economy. These categories and their rankings play a direct role in deciding which sex has greater access to power, wealth, and prestige. This is because the categories of male and female are associated with attributes that are used to reinforce the differences in perceived economic value, which acts to perpetuate gender inequality within the economy. In our society, the ideal qualities for the category male is someone who is tough, logical, level-headed, and quick to decide. If a man is stern, decisive, and opinionated, then he is perceived to be confident and competent. He is worthy of a high economic rank, like CEO. Conversely, the ideal qualities associated with the category female is someone who is beautiful, caring, nurturing, and patient. While these are great qualities for reproductive labor, they are not great qualities for cutthroat business. Thus, while men's adherence to gender ideals reinforces their economic clout, women's adherence to their gender ideals oftentimes undermines their ability to advance in their career. In short, gender stratification manifests as gender inequality. Perhaps the best example of this is if we look at leadership and how society defines it. In most cases, the category male is associated with leader far more often than female. This picture clearly shows how the U.S. political power has been monopolized by men. So why is this the case? The answer to this question is more complex than what can be discussed here. But in general, the qualities that we associate with the category male help men become more eligible to fill positions of power than those we associate with the category female. Those categories help justify women's overrepresentation in positions of subordination and support. Think about it this way. If women take on the role and the attributes associated with the category male, there's a tendency for both men and women to categorize that strong female as either a bitch or as cold-hearted. Thus, gender stratification is inherently linked to gender inequality. With this in mind, it is not hard to realize that the placement of people into a given category can have a direct impact on their ability to be included in other categories. When gender stratification is examined on a grand scale and over time, we find that women have been largely excluded from important economic and political positions, or those with high rankings in society like president. When they are included, women still have a tendency to be valued less because the pressure to conform to gender ideals is constant. Examples of gender inequality stemming from gender stratification is probably most prominent in business, where women not only make less money than men on average, but they are also underrepresented in positions of power and must constantly work against gender stereotypes in pursuit of career advancement. I did a simple search for the word leader using Bing. Of the pictures that I found with people in them, the most common theme showed a man standing in front of lesser-ranked women and lesser-ranked men. I could not find one picture that showed a female being depicted in this way. In fact, I only found one photo that depicted a female as a leader. This photo provides another example. I found this picture while searching for the term rich. I wasn't surprised to find a picture of the stock exchange, but as a sociologist, as someone trained to see social stratification and link it to social inequality, this photo spoke volumes. It is a perfect display of how gender stratification underlies gender inequality. If you look at the photo, you will notice that the majority of the men are lined up at the front of the photo. They clearly stand out more so than the women, and the men are clearly positioned in a way to show that they are the most important subjects of the photo. The women, on the other hand, are either in the second or third row, or they are obscured by the men in front of them, even though they may be just as important to the firm as the men. We can only assume that if one of the women held a high-ranking position in the firm, then she would be in a more pronounced placement, as leaders often are. In short, this photograph offers us a peek at the manifestation of gender inequality in a real-world situation. Like other forms of inequality, gender inequality rests on the framework of gender stratification. That is, the categorization of men and women into different and unequal ranks. To conclude, social stratification is at the heart of sociological research and analysis. When sociologists talk about social stratification, they're referring to the intentional or unintentional categorization of people as a means to establish differences in rank or social value between groups or people within society. Those placed in the categories with a higher rank tend to have higher social value, while those placed in the categories of lower rank tend to have lower social value. All societies, regardless of their size or complexity, create categories that place people into ranks which are assigned different values. Categories and their social values can change over time, especially when new categories emerge in response to other social changes. All categories, however, are associated with social inequalities, and some inequalities have a tendency to persist over time in spite of the changes to the category. Thus, it is up to sociologists to identify the categories and ranks that are contained within social stratification systems and explore how they change over time and how they are directly and indirectly linked to social inequalities.